Hey, this is Gary with Jolly Dolly, and today we're going to show you how to install a winch on a Jolly Dolly Power Pro motorized dolly that doesn't already have one. Now, all of the Power Pros include this mounting plate to make mounting a winch easy. In this video, we're going to show you how to do this using the kit that we provide. That's going to include the winch, the battery indicator, the battery charger, the on-off switch, the in-out switch, the wireless remotes and receiver, the pulley, the battery tie down, and a pre-crimped wiring harness to make installation easy. You won't have to do any wire splicing. Now, feel free to use this video if you want to buy your own winch and do your own installation. You will have to acquire the parts on your own, and you will have to do all of the wiring by yourself. First step is going to be to lay the dolly down on its belly like this and make sure that it's turned off. You're going to remove the rear cover plate by first removing the Phillips screws that hold it in place. As you lift the cover up, be aware that you'll probably have a lithium battery charger attached to the cover with wires going into the dolly. So you trace the charger wires to where they connect to the dolly and disconnect them. This is a good time to check and make sure your dolly has dual AC charge ports. If your dolly only has one, you're going to need to install a dual so that you have an extra charge port for the winch charger. Okay, so the winch module gets mounted in this area over here with the yellow and blue wires on the top. You should have some screw holes in the dolly already, but they may or may not line up with the module. So what you're going to do is a test fit. Start with a screw in the top hole through the outside of the dolly into the module mounting hole, and then try out the bottom screw. And if that screw doesn't go through, what you can do is drill a new hole, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to use the top hole. We're going to drill a new bottom hole, and we're going to do that by using this as a template starting on the outside of the dolly. So we're going to take one of the mounting screws for this and put it through here and into the top hole here. We're going to hold that there. And you'll notice this is a little bit crooked, but that's good because we want to stay away from this thing to make sure we got plenty of room to mount it. So rest the edge up against this vent. Then you're going to take your drill and go into the hole on the bottom and drill a hole through the dolly. Just make sure there's nothing behind here that's going to get hit. In this case, there is a wiring harness, so I'm going to push that out the way. When you're ready to install your winch module, here's a trick I like to do. Hold the winch module like this, balance a flange nut on your finger. In your other hand, you're going to have your screw with fender washer. So you're going to start with the bottom hole and make sure you're using the drilled hole, not the original hole. And make sure your wires are oriented correctly. You're going to go through the outside of the cabinet with your screw. And the trick is to thread it through the mounting hole and into the flange nut that's balanced on your finger before you drop it. It's actually not as hard as it sounds. And once you get the bottom in hand tight, you go ahead and put your top screw in. And same thing, I like to just kind of use my finger to hold the nut. And it's pretty easy to get these threaded. And then once the flange nut touches the plastic, it'll bite into the plastic, and you can tighten these up with just a screwdriver. You don't need to get a wrench or socket on them. So your dolly probably has plugs on these two holes right here, so you want to go behind them and push these out. Sometimes these are super glued in, and in that case you may have to punch them out with something, hammer them out, or you may have to drill them out as a last resort. Next, we're going to thread our yellow and blue wires through the larger of these two holes right here. So you're going to feed these yellow and blue wires from the inside of the dolly to the outside of the dolly, one wire at a time. Push the ring terminal through first and then pull the excess wire through. Next, you're going to take your grommet and put these ring terminals through the grommet one at a time. And just kind of wiggle them through like this. Then you can push the grommet all the way down the wires back to the hole. And then we're going to put this grommet into place just by kind of manipulating it, wiggling it around. It's rubber, so it will work. You can use a blunt tool. Screwdriver is probably not a good choice, but this is a big one, so it's not very sharp. You can also work from the inside and just kind of pull on it until you get it fully seated. All right, next we're going to install the switch, which is going to go through this hole in the cabinet. Then we put our switch guard on. It's got a notch, so it only goes on in one direction. Then we put our washer and then the retainer nut. We're going to go ahead and hand tighten this retainer nut. And we make sure that this is oriented towards the top of the dolly. Then we'll take a 14mm wrench and tighten this. Next, we're going to install the battery indicator, which depending on your model might be right here or it might be on the back panel, but you're probably going to have a plastic plug taking its place, and you're just going to remove the screws and pop this plastic panel out. Then we're going to take the battery indicator and make sure this is oriented correctly, so when the dolly's right side up, you're going to match this one and just push it into place. And then this plugs into the back of the battery indicator. Make sure you align the notches with the cutout in the battery indicator as you install this wire, and push it all the way in. Now we're going to route your wiring harness for the in-out switch and the wireless remote receiver. So we need to stretch this out, make sure there's no knots or kinks in it. And at the very end, we see this cable. This is a fishing cable that we've installed and included in your kit. So you're going to insert it into that hole right there. This is on the left-hand side of the dolly as you're standing behind it. So you want your cable to go in here and then go up the dolly so that we can retrieve it at the hole at the top, which is meant for the in and out switch. So on the other end, you're looking through this big hole for your cable, and that's why we put this flag on the end of it to kind of help you locate it and fish it out. This can be a little tricky and it may take some trial and error. You can also work the cable from the other end to kind of back and forth until it's in a place that's accessible to you. And then once the cable is through, you keep pulling to get the rest of the wire out. You do need to work the other end to guide it into the hole down there, and then you just keep pushing and or pulling on this side. And once you get to where the wires are coming through, that's where you got to be really careful because it's easy to pull too hard and rip the cable out or to snag the wires. So you have to have some patience. You have to keep working both ends. And I'm trying to do this for the camera. It's not very easy. There we go. You know, just keep working it. There's a bunch of connectors in here that can be damaged if you pull too hard or if you snag them. So keep working it. Eventually you'll get it all the way through. Once you get the wire through, you can go ahead and remove all this electrical tape. Once you have your wires through, you want to get your in-out switch ready and locate the correct size grommet that's going to fit this hole. We're going to put the grommet on the in-out switch, one wire at a time. Make sure this is in place before you do these connections or you'll be taking it back apart. Now we're going to connect the wires color for color, red to red, black to black, blue to blue. And again, if these won't go together, just flip them around. Once you have your wires connected, You want to start routing them in here. This is going to be tricky. You want to do one connector at a time. You're pushing them down into the frame of the dolly. You want to be very careful not to nick any of the wires. And you may have to manipulate the wires on the other side here in order to get them going in the right direction. And then once you get them in, we're going to stuff this in, and again, pull on the wire on the other side if you need to. And then we're going to go ahead and put our grommet in place. And you can use a blunt tool if you need to. Make sure it's fully seated. Now we're ready to mount the switch. You're going to take your switch and make sure it's oriented so you can read it when the dolly's right side up. It goes on the inside of the frame, and then the screws go through the switch into the outside of the dolly where you put a fender washer on the outside, and then your lock washer. Start that threading by hand, it won't go far. Same thing on the top. Through the switch to the outside of the frame, fender washer, lock nut. So you tighten up these screws with a Phillips screwdriver and an 8mm. And then you need to break the excess screw off so it doesn't stab somebody, and do that with vice grips. You could probably do it with pliers if you can get a good enough grip. Just clamp down and then back and forth until it breaks. So once the wire's been pulled all the way up through the frame, this wire just can be tucked away or it can hang loose. We usually zip tie it right here. Now you have your wireless remote, and you have two choices with this. You can try to mount it on the inside, which is going to be the easiest option, but you may have issues with range of the remote. The other option is to drill a hole in this area and mount it on the outside of the dolly and run the wires inside. So I'll show you how to do that. Working from outside the dolly, we're going to take a square and mark 4 inches like that, and then 4 inches in the other direction. That's going to be our hole for the wireless remote. So we're going to take a punch, put it right in the center, give it a good hard lick. Now we're going to take a step bit on our impact and drill this hole to about 5/8 of an inch. So we can test the size of our hole by putting the grommet in. This is going to be way too tight, so we need to go up a size. That should work. Then we come from the other side to kind of deburr it. Make sure you either blow out or vacuum out these metal shards. Your winch receiver is going to be placed so that it's just above the hole you drilled for the wiring when the dolly is in the upright position. And you're putting these 4 wires through. This blue wire is an antenna wire, and that stays on the outside of the dolly. So we're going to route these wires inside, again, one at a time, so they'll fit through. And then you're going to put your grommet in place. And you may need a blunt tool to help you. And you work this grommet until you get it fully seated into the hole. Now, once you have the wires in there, you push in the excess, peel off your backing of the double sticky tape, and then line this up so it's straight, push it into place, And now you have your remote mounted. Now to keep the remote wire from getting snagged on something, we're going to take a piece of electric tape. We're going to make sure to scissor cut it instead of pulling it. We're going to stretch this out, and then we're going to tape it to the frame of the dolly. It's critical to get the wire color coding correct, or you will damage the receiver. I usually start with the black wire on the receiver. That's got to go to the green wire on the dolly. If these connectors don't want to go together, just flip them around. I'll show you what I mean. You're going to go red to red. If it doesn't work this way, if it doesn't want to go in, just flip it around, and it usually will go in the opposite way. Once you've got those two wires, the last two wires are not as important. If you get them backwards, the worst that's going to happen is the winch goes in the wrong direction. But we're going white to black here, and we're going yellow to blue. And you make sure those are fully seated. If you removed your battery for better access to this, make sure these wires are out of the way when you put your battery back in. You don't want the battery to set on top of any of these wires where it could pinch. Next, you want to locate the battery charger that came with your kit and see if it has ring terminals connected to it. You may have a battery charger like this that has a disconnect, and then there'll be a separate wire whip with another disconnect, and this whip has the ring terminals. You just need to locate these because these have to be connected to the battery terminals along with the other wires. Okay, next we're going to mount the battery charger to the rear cover plate so that the LEDs are visible. So for that, we're going to drill a hole. Your kit probably came with a template like this. Now we do have different battery chargers that we use, and we could change them in the future. So if we do, the template's going to change. This template shows us where the battery indicator is going to be and where to drill the hole. It's also got a hole on there showing where the original hole should be on your rear cover plate so that you can make sure you're lining the template up properly. The reason we can't use that hole is it was for a custom battery charger that we don't have access to anymore. So you want to take some blue tape, make sure the edges of the paper are perfectly lined up with the edges here. And we're going to tape this in place. Now we're going to take a center punch and put it right on that X and give it a good whack. Now we can also go ahead and lightly punch out the corners of where the battery charger is going to go, and this will just make it a little bit easier. So we remove that and make sure that you drill the correct hole. That's going to be the center one right there. I like to do this using a step bit. You can use a regular drill bit, or you can use a smaller drill bit and then get progressively larger drill bits in there. I like to drill the hole about that size, and we flip it over and use the step bit to deburr it. It needs to be big enough that you can see the LEDs through here, and the bigger the hole is, the less accurate you have to be with the placement. So these LEDs, we don't want to see the power light because it's going to confuse us. So I usually tape that up with some electrical tape on these particular ones. Because the power button's green, it can make you think that it's fully charged when it's not. All right, so before we peel the backing off of our double stick tape, we want to see where this is actually going. And you can see by the holes I punched, it's going in this general area. Now we need to make sure we have it oriented so that the LED lights, which are right here, are going to line up with that hole. So that's the basic orientation that it's going on. So we're going to flip this over and then pull this out from under here. Now we're going to peel our backing off of the double stick tape. And you only get one shot, so make sure you do this right. Identify the two LEDs that need to be visible. Then hold this steady and move this around until you find the LEDs. Make sure it's straight, and then push up on it and firmly press the battery charger in place and confirm that you can indeed see the LEDs through the hole. Now we're going to install a battery. If your dolly has a battery compartment like this for the winch battery, you're going to install the battery with the negative facing the bottom of the dolly, and then immediately you're going to put this mounting tie down on top, and then you're going to put your screws. Got to make sure you have your lock washer and your flat washer on here. That's going to go down through here into these mounting holes. All right, you can go ahead and tighten these down using a 7/16 socket and ratchet. You want to make sure to tighten them evenly, back and forth, a little bit at a time, so you don't pinch one side of the battery. And keep going until it's nice and solid and not going anywhere. Now we can start hooking up some of these wires. Make sure our switch is turned off before we hook anything up. We're going to start with the ground or the negative. We're going to find the black wire, big black wire, and combine that with the black wire coming off the charger. And we're going to put the screw through the charger wire and then through the big black wire and start to thread that on by hand. We got to make sure we have our washer as well as our lock washer on there. On the positive side, we locate the red charger wire as well as this red wire, and through the charger wire first, through the red wire into the battery terminal, hand tighten, again making sure we have washer and lock washer. Tighten this down by hand, then we can test it by turning it on and just checking to see if our battery indicator comes on. Once you're sure everything is working, you can go ahead and tighten down the battery terminals with a 10 mil. You want them nice and tight, but not so tight as to damage the battery terminal. Before you install the winch, you may need to tap out these bolt holes with a M8 125 tap. That's if they have these weld nuts under there. Some of the older dollies may not have these, and in that case you'll need to put a nut under there when you put the bolt through to mount the winch. So you put the bolts through the winch and then through the mounting plate that comes with the winch, and then that goes through the mounting plate on the dolly, and on the bottom it will screw into these weld tabs, or if you don't have weld tabs, then you'll need to use the nuts and the washers that came with the bolts to tighten this in place. When you install the wires, the winch should be color coded blue and yellow. The worst that happens if you get them backwards is it goes the wrong direction and you'll have to swap them. You want to take the ring terminal and sandwich it between two washers and then put the nut on, and this needs to be really tight. Once you have the winch hooked up, turn the system on so we can test it. Check your battery indicator, make sure it's coming on. Then you can start with your in-out button on the dolly itself. Make sure it's working and going the correct directions. Then you go to your wireless remotes, turn them on, test them for function, and also test them to make sure they're going the correct direction. Then you want to check them for range. So you want to take one remote in each hand and operate them as you walk away from the dolly one at a time to make sure that they both can go up to about 30 or 40 feet before you start to lose signal. All right, so once everything's been tested and you're ready to close the dolly up, we're going to remove our rear cover into position. We need to make sure we hook all these wires up. We're going to start with the lithium battery charger for the dolly. That's got an AC connection that's going to plug into one of the two AC charge ports in the dolly. Then the DC side of it will connect to this battery connector. Then we have our winch charger. We'll start with the AC side that goes to the second of the two AC charge ports. And then we go to the DC side. If your winch charger has this disconnect, you'll connect it at this time. And the other end of this should be already connected to the battery terminals. Now, if your dolly also has a battery indicator that's mounted back here for the winch, you would connect it at this time, but this one does not. Now, as we go to close it up, we need to make sure that the wires are out of the way and they're going to go in somewhere that they're not going to get pinched. And this should fully seat down on the lip of the cabinet, and we make sure there's no wires pinched, and then we can reinstall our screws. This is also a good time to go ahead and test the charging of both the dolly and the winch to make sure that the LED lights are coming on and that the batteries are charging. And if your winch battery indicator happens to be back here, it's a good thing to go ahead and turn the winch system on and make sure that is connected and working. Last but not least, you can install the decals that came with your kit. The one for the winch battery status indicator may go on the top of the cabinet, or it may go on the rear panel. The one for the charging status should point to the charger LED. That's the hole that you drilled on the back panel. If you have any questions about the installation process, please get in touch with us by messaging our Facebook page. Thanks for watching.